The September 11th Victim Compensation Fund has helped pay out billions of dollars to individuals dealing with the long-term impacts of the terror attacks. But the fund has faced many major challenges. Former Special Master Rupa Bhattacharyya at the Justice Department turned that program around. She's also a finalist for a Service to America award. Rupa, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
So first, can you talk a bit about the history of the fund and where it was when you joined in 2016?
Sure. So the September 11th Victim Compensation Fund was created immediately after the attacks occurred in 2001. It was set up in October in its first incarnation. That was the fund that was operated by Special Master Ken Feinberg, and it paid out over $7 billion to over 5,000 people, but it closed in 2004. And it was originally responsible for compensating the people who were immediately impacted, those who were on the buildings, those who were in the planes. By 2011, it had become clear that the tragedy of September 11th was not over. People were continuing to get sick as a result of exposure to the toxins that were released by the plane crashes at all three crash sites. And so Congress reopened the fund. But at the time, no one knew how many people had been exposed. No one knew how many people would ultimately get sick. No one knew how many conditions might actually be connected to 9/11 exposure. And so the fund was set up for 5 years with a very limited pot of money. And in 2016, it had just been renewed for 5 more years. It had originally been slated to close in 2016, but in 2015, Congress renewed it for 5 more years. And that's when I came in to try to figure out what was happening with the fund, to try to figure out how to get money to these claimants more quickly, and really essentially to try to figure out how many claimants there might ultimately be that needed compensation.
But Rupa, at the time, claim processing was taking 3+ years. I mean, how could it possibly get that bad?
It's a combination of a number of factors. It took a long time for the fund to get set up and started, and a lot of that work came in handy very much later for us. But there are a lot of relationships that needed to be built. The Victims Compensation Fund gets a lot of information from other entities, from other federal agencies, from a lot of the state and local entities, particularly in New York City. A lot of those relationships and information sharing arrangements had to be built in those early years. But it was slow to get off the ground for a whole variety of reasons. And one of my main goals when I came in was to make it go faster. It needed to go faster.
So then how did you do that, Rupa?
I like to say we took the program apart and we put it back together again. I mean, we essentially rebuilt the program from the ground up. We revised the claim form so that we were getting better information. We did a bunch of outreach and education efforts with the claimant populations, with advocacy groups, with attorneys, so that they could get us better information and understood what we needed and what sorts of documents were necessary. We did a lot of policy making, and we created a set of guidelines that would be used in the first instance to evaluate claims so that claim reviewers didn't approach every claim as though they were starting from scratch. But we built in enough flexibility so we could make distinction when needed. But we really tried to streamline the process. We ramped up our staffing to bring on more people, and just made a number of changes in the process to try to make it go faster. And we succeeded. By the time after several years, it did take a while, but we are now down to getting claims decided within a year of when they were filed, which was our goal.
So you mentioned the challenge of funding earlier from Congress. During your time, the program was set to expire and was running out of money. So how did you address that issue?
So it was a rough decision for me to make. It was probably the hardest decision I've ever made in my government career. We could tell that we were not going to have enough money to compensate all of the claims that we anticipated getting, and the statute directed the special master to make policy changes to accommodate that, to ensure that we did not run out of money. And so we we put in place a process where we first went out to the community, to the claimants, to their attorneys, to the advocacy groups, and asked for comment. We wanted to know how they thought we should deal with this problem. And we also wanted to be very transparent about what we were doing and make sure people understood why we thought we were running out of money, what ways we might address that. And ultimately, we made the decision that we would need to cut awards. And we did cut awards by starting in February of 2019 by 50%, with anticipating that future awards would need to be cut even more in order to stay within the funding cap that we had. Thankfully, we never got to that point because Congress then reauthorized the fund for a second time, giving us all the money that we needed.
And Rupa, you know, toxic exposure can be very hard to prove. So how do claimants prove that their illness was due to exposure from the 9/11 attacks?
So that's a very good question, and thankfully one that the September 11th Victim Compensation Fund doesn't actually have to deal with. We are the lawyers, not the doctors. We have a sister program over at the Department of Health and Human Services, which is the World Trade Center Health Program. It's run out of the National Institutes for Occupational Safety and Health, and they make the medical determinations about which claims are related to 9/11 exposure. They provide medical treatment for those claims. And so in addition to our compensation program, the federal government also has a medical treatment program for these victims. And so we rely on their determinations of 9/11 relatedness.
All right. Well, Rupa, thank you so much for joining us and being on the program.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on any future Government Matters interviews.